Thank you very much for that overview, General Carter. We have colleagues here in the room. We also have some questions that have been sent in by email from other colleagues who are unable to attend but who are watching this live cast. And because you were referring to those complex attacks we've seen, I'll actually start with a question that was emailed in by Jonathan Beale, the defence correspondent of the BBC, who's in London, saying this Monday insurgents mounted a complex attack on a joint British and Afghan patrol base that injured many and left one British soldier dead. Is this a sign that there will be more intense fighting over the summer and that the Afghans will still require the help of international forces, even though they are now in the security lead? That's the question from the BBC.
Thank you. No, I don't think it's a sign that we should expect any greater or more intense fighting during the course of this summer. As I said in my opening remarks, it is the case that the insurgency has the capability to mount complex attacks, and regardless of our role in all of this and the relationship that we have in terms of train, advise, assist to the Afghans, we should still be on our guard for those sorts of complex attacks. I think if you analyse the statistics between what took place in the first quarter of 2012 with what is taking place this quarter, recognising there are still 3 or 4 days to go in it, it is a reduction of some 14% in terms of the amount of violence that we're seeing. It is the case that in terms of violence, around 40% of the violence during the course of last year was confined to some 10 districts. And of course the complex attack that took place in Nadi Ali last night is representative of one of the districts that does tend to come under pressure during the course of the violence that I described. So no, I don't think it's an indicator that we should expect things to be any more intense this summer. We'll be on our guard, but I'm also confident that the Afghans with us in support will be able to handle any pressure that comes during the course of the summer. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Christophe Lamfalussy. I'm a journalist for La Libre Belgique. I would like to know, when are you turning to phase 4 of the transition? Is there an agenda for that?
I'm not entirely familiar with the term you're using. As we understand it, and as it was laid out after Lisbon, the transition process is in 5 tranches. Tranche 4 of transition was announced by President Karzai on the 31st of December last year and was implemented during the course of February. The final tranche, tranche 5, we expect to see or hear an announcement at some stage later in the spring. And then effectively all of the geographical aspect of Afghanistan will be in transition. I hope that answers your question.
Do you have a follow-up?
Another question about the number of casualties among the police and Afghan soldiers. We were told that there were 3,000 soldiers and policemen killed in the last 12 months. What is your reaction to that?
Well, first and foremost, it is great sympathy for the families and, of course, people who've lost their lives during the course of last year. We should be in no doubt that the level of attrition in terms of the Afghan security forces is something that causes us great concern, and we work very closely with our Afghan partners to try and reduce the level of attrition. And you would expect, I think, as the Afghans increasingly assume the responsibility for the security lead, that they are going to be more in the front line than ISAF, and therefore it is inevitable that their casualty rate is going to be greater than the coalition's casualty rate. I think there are a number of areas where we're going to have to focus our attention in order to reduce this, though. First and foremost, of course, is the IED threat, and the way in which Afghans are equipped and trained to deal with this threat is something that we're going to play and do pay a great deal of attention to currently and will do during the course of the summer. Of course, it's important that leadership understands all of this as well. And I'm in no doubt in my regular engagements with Bismillah Mohammadi, the Minister of Defence, and General Karimi, the Chief of Staff of the Afghan Army, that they take this very, very seriously. And they are working hard to see how they can inculcate in their chain of command the sort of leadership that's necessary to mitigate a great deal of this particular issue. Having said that, in terms of sustainability, it is the case that the Kabul Military Training Centre is full of recruits and that the Afghan army has no difficulty in recruiting soldiers at the moment. But clearly, a rotation of some 25% in an army on an annual basis is unsustainable, and that's why it has to be fixed. Thank you.
Let me proceed with a couple of other questions that we got by email. One is from Brian McManus from Agence France Presse. He's asking recent US intelligence report, which was presented by the National Intelligence Director James Clapper at a Senate hearing on the 12th of March, was decidedly negative on the outlook of Afghanistan. What is the military view of this report? And a second question from Sid Standifer from Stars and Stripes regarding the agreement reached last week that ISAF forces in Wardak province will be replaced by the Afghan security forces. Will certain types of operations, such as night raids, be restricted before the transition is complete?
Okay, thank you for that. I'll deal with the intelligence report first and foremost. I think it is one of the ironies of Afghanistan that the nearer you come to Afghanistan in geographical terms, the better things look. And I would judge firmly that sitting here in Afghanistan, the view that I gave you in my opening remarks is an accurate reflection of the state of affairs as we speak. It is also everybody's right to have their own perception of how things look in the campaign. And I think that in the assessment I gave you, I'm being realistic. There will always be problems and there will always be setbacks. But what reassures me as I look forwards is the confidence that the Afghan security forces seem to have today and ever increasing in order to take charge of their own destiny in all of this. And whilst you can always take hostage of your fears, I'm pretty confident that as things stand at the moment, we are going in the right direction. There will always be setbacks, but generally speaking, we're well tilted for the future. Now, the Wardak issue is a complicated issue. Wardak is one of the most complicated provinces in Afghanistan, and it's a sure bellwether as to how the transitional process will evolve during this summer, I sense. It sits on many political divides. There's a political divide between Taliban and HIG. There's a divide between Kuchi nomads and Hazaras, and there's a Pashto dimension to all of that. None of this is helped by the fact that much of the landed leadership has left Wardak and resides in Kabul, which is adjacent to Wardak. And that means that the nature of political leadership on the ground is not perhaps as strong as it might be in some other provinces. Now, for all of those reasons, Wardak has always been a difficult province to provide governance in and to provide security in tandem with that governance. So I think it's not surprising that it's emerged as an issue this winter, and it'll be something that'll need to be very carefully monitored during the course of the summer. Now, I talked about a bellwether in terms of transition. It's entirely sensible for the district of Nurk, which has a great deal of political complication as well, to be transitioned to an Afghan solution. And the Afghans at the moment are working through their plans for how they will assume responsibility for that district. Elsewhere in Wardak, it's still the same, that we have conventional forces and we have ISAF special forces operating in partnership with Afghans to deliver a layered security effect, and none of that has changed. Thank you.
We'll go to James.
Yes. Where am I now? So I was just wondering, as you're carrying training up to the core level, what the potential stumbling blocks are going to be, and also, are there any equipment deficiencies on the ANSF side there? Thank you.
I think that as we lift up the Afghan chain of command to the core level, we'll need to be certain as we do this that the connecting tissue between the core level and the brigade level is as good as it can possibly be. The core level, of course, in functionality terms, is much more about force generation about training, about recruiting, and about the sort of administration that comes with being at the district, at a sort of district command level. It's the brigades that are the organisations where you bring together the combined arms effect of armies, and they are the elements within the Afghan army that manoeuvre to achieve tactical output on the ground. And the relationship between those two levels of command is a really important one. And it's our sense that going back to where we need to apply support to the Afghans, that it'll be command and control, the sharing of intelligence, and the delivery of some of the supporting effects like counter-IED, the air power piece of it, and of course the medevac piece of it, which will need attention. And it'll be the corps level that will deliver much of that to the brigade level. And those are the areas which we'll have to apply a good deal of attention to, I sense, during the course of the summer, and then in developmental terms thereafter. I would emphasise, though, that as we lift up to the corps level, we will retain some capability to be able to visit the brigade level and make sure that the connection is properly affected. And I know that the Afghans are very keen that that should endure, and President Karzai was opining on that only today himself. Thank you.
Reuters.
General Adrian Croft from Reuters. On Tranche 5, I wonder if you can be more specific about when you expect Tranche 5 to begin, rather than just the end of spring. Could you give us a more specific timing? And on any spring offensive this year, from the intelligence you're getting, do you think it's more likely to be large attacks in major centres that the Taliban and the Haqqani network would focus on, or a more traditional battleground offensive? Thanks.
On the Tranche 5 piece of it, we're still working the details through with the Afghans. And as you know, there's a process that is gone through, known as the Janib process, where we have discussions with the lead or the chair of the Transition Commission, Dr. Ashraf Ghani, who I work very closely with the NATO SCR. And subject to his recommendations, which he will discuss with President Karzai, we will come forward, I suspect, with some suggestions as to when the right timing should be for this announcement. Whether it is connected to a NATO mini-summit in June or something like that, I don't know, but we are working the issues at the moment. I think, we will want to be absolutely certain that as we do all of this, that we've got the right conditions in place for that tranche to be announced. And that's the issue that needs to be worked closely with the Afghans at the moment. Now, in terms of how we think the insurgency will behave during the course of the spring and the summer, it's our belief that the frontier districts running down the Pakistani border will, as they've always been areas where the threat will be significant. And of course, it is Kabul that is the centre of gravity in geographical terms, and it is Kabul that we would expect also to be threatened. And that's why the belt districts and provinces around Kabul are important, whether it's Logar or Wardak, or the areas to the north of Kabul as well. And if you look at a map, you know as well as I do that it's only some 70 miles from Pakistan through to Kabul if you take the direct route through Paktia and up into Logar and Wardak. It's also our expectation that the insurgency will want to have a go in the Pashtun heartlands in the south. And the complex attack you heard about in Helmand in the last 24 hours is an indicator of that, I sense. And they will also, I suspect, wish to have a go at Kandahar. Now, I personally had not been back to Kandahar since I left it in November of 2010 until about 5 or 6 weeks ago. And it was extraordinarily encouraging for me to see what the conditions looked like on the ground there. You've got an impressive security situation. And it's impressive to the extent that the local population and the governor are now able to focus their efforts very much on the economy, on prosperity, and on employment. And that is not a dynamic that would have been evident in November of 2010. So to my mind, there's been a great deal of progress in Kandahar, and I sense that the insurgency will find it difficult during the course of this spring and summer to make progress in Kandahar. And Afghans will tell you that a secure Kandahar leads to a secure Afghanistan. So I think that's extremely reassuring. Thank you.
I've got 2 more questions sent in by email. If you have a couple of more minutes, General Carter, both about the future, and I think we have 1 more here. Let me just quickly give you one from Europa Press, from Ana Pisonero. How important is it for ISAF to see progress with reconciliation before the post-2014 mission is lined up? And I'll go to the back to the Stuttgarter Zeitung, so we group those 2 questions.
Hello, Christopher Ziedler from the Stuttgarter Zeitung in Germany. I'm interested in what your reading is of President Karzai's latest comments on the NATO presence in Afghanistan, and if there have been sort of actual setbacks or deteriorations in the cooperation with the Afghan side following those comments. Thank you.
I'll deal first with the question on reconciliation. The answer is that it's essential to campaign success that there is a process of reconciliation and political participation. Counterinsurgencies are only ultimately solved through politics, and almost everything you see in Afghanistan ultimately comes back to politics. Now, I would emphasize that whilst it's vital to the ISAF campaign, we should be in no doubt that it will be the Afghan government that will lead this process, and it'll be the Afghan government that will create the conditions for political participation and a process that all Afghans can buy into. So yes, it's very, very important to the success of the campaign, and it's absolutely critical to future peace and prosperity in Afghanistan. Now, turning to the NATO presence in Afghanistan, I'm confident that we have a well thought through plan which brings together in a strategic partnership all of the issues that need to be resolved as we step through transition. This is a plan that General Dunford discusses regularly with President Karzai. He's been with him a couple of times today to talk about these sorts of issues. And we're in a place now, I think, where we have established mutual understanding on many of the difficult issues associated with transition, and how it is that over time we will build Afghan capacity to be able to assume responsibility for the issues that come with sovereignty. And of course, sovereignty is a two-way process. It's about also being capable of assuring sovereignty, as well as it's being capable of receiving sovereignty. And I'm much encouraged by the way in which this problem is being tackled. And I think the recent resolution of the DFIP transfer at Parwan is a good indicator of how we can work together collaboratively to deal with the issues that we need to resolve as we step forward through the whole transition process. Thank you.
I'm fully aware, General Carter, that you need to go in, I think, exactly 2 minutes. I don't see any hand raised here. I have one final question from the Japanese newspaper Mainichi Shimbun from Yoshihiko Saito. This is a question about the post-2014 planned NATO-led train, advise and assist mission. He says the former Secretary of Defense, US Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta indicated that the entire NATO troops post-2014 in Afghanistan might be between 8,000 and 12,000. Would that be enough? How many Afghan security forces would be needed to maintain security with this amount of foreign troops? Of course, I would stress before I pass over to you for your final answer that this is a planning assumption of a possible range, and that, of course, the planned post-2014 NATO-led mission would not be a combat mission, so we're not talking about fighting troops. This will be a mission to train, advise and assist. But over to you for your views.
No, and I echo the point you make about this being a planning assumption. And what is happening based upon that assumption is that the NATO process is now looking at how one might use that assumption to translate effect on the ground and how that might work out into a deployment around Afghanistan. It's our judgment that it provides us with the capability and capacity to provide what's called a limited regional presence, which means that we would expect to have train, advise, assist missions in each of the 6 Afghan corps and at the police zone level. Turning to whether or not this is enough to do the job, and indeed whether the figure of 352,000 Afghan security forces is adequate to do the job. I think that I'm going to slightly duck the question, if you'll excuse me, because it goes back to the answer that I gave to the previous question. It all depends upon politics. If there is political participation, and if there is an outcome to the transition in 2014 that is acceptable to the majority of Afghans, then the quantity of security forces would not necessarily need to be as great as 352. On the other hand, if political participation doesn't happen in the way that we'd like it to happen, 352 may be a necessary figure. Everything has to be conditions-based, and it all falls out of the political circumstances and situation that evolves during the course of 2014 and into 2015. Thank you very much for your attention. It's been a pleasure being with you this afternoon, and I much look forward to re-engaging, if you require it, at some stage in the next 3 to 4 months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Nick Carter, Deputy Commander of ISAF. Thank you very much from Brussels.